Welcome, everybody. Good evening. My name is Danny Lay. I'm a librarian here at the Marin County Free Library here at Nevada Library. And we're grateful to have you this evening with me and Hollis Wong-Wear. It's going to be a great interview. Once again, we will be recording and posting this interview up later on the library website. So stay tuned to that. Share that, please. It's going to be fun. Without further ado, I'm going to jump start with a bio. Hollis Wong-Wear is a songwriter, musician, speaker, creative generator, and community advocate who lives between Los Angeles and Seattle, Washington. She's the lead vocalist for the electronic R&B duo The Flavor Blue and was Grammy nominated in 2014 for her work with Macklemore and Ryan Lewis. With her roots in spoken word and slam poetry through the nationally recognized Youth Speaks program, Hollis is passionate about how creativity and the arts fuel and shape civil discourse, and is dedicated to lending her voice and capacities towards vibrant social equity. So let's all give a warm virtual welcome to Hollis.
Yay! Thank you so much, Danny. It's always so wonderful to see your face and hear your energy. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we've known each other for a long time, Hollis, and it's always a family reunion when we get to talk like this, even virtually. So
true.
Definitely just tell us, Hollis, how are you doing and where are you currently sheltering in place right now?
Sure, for sure. So I'm actually in Marin County right now. I live in Los Angeles, and as you mentioned in my bio, I do go back and forth between LA and Seattle, but my mom unfortunately fell and broke a bone, and it's really difficult for her to walk. So I am here. I am Larkspur adjacent, and we'll get into that in a bit. But yeah, I'm here back in Marin, just reminded of how beautiful it is here, the natural environment, the views, Mount Tam, everything. And even though I'm spending most of my days inside working and taking care of my mom, it's really nice to be back.
Well, great to have you back. Welcome back to the North Cal, Bay, whatever you call home. So
yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your, upbringing and the years between that, kind of define your identity, maybe your worldview, and maybe your perception about society in general? How was your upbringing, where you were born?
Absolutely. So I was born in Petaluma, California. My mom is Chinese American. She immigrated by herself when she was 19 years old from Hong Kong and settled pretty quickly into the San Francisco Bay Area. And my dad and my mom actually met in Marin County. My dad was born in Nebraska. He was a military brat. He moved around a lot as a kid, but he drove his VW bug rather, from New Orleans to Marin County and settled down here. And he actually found his way into building playgrounds for a living. So that's what he's been doing. He's 76 now and he's been doing it for over 40 years. So if you've played on a playground in Marin or anywhere in the Bay Area, you likely have played on a structure that my dad or my dad's company has built. So, so my parents, I was the first child. I grew up in Petaluma, and then pretty quickly we started going to public school here in Marin County, and we would commute from Petaluma to Marin to attend public school. And yeah, I mean, I think for me, in terms of identity formation, obviously my mother is she's a matriarchal figure. She's a really strong figure in my life. And being the eldest daughter, obviously a huge influence on me. When she was actually pregnant with me, she transitioned from a career as a real estate broker to being a restaurateur. And so she owned a Chinese restaurant called the Canton that was on the main strip of Petaluma. And it was really one of the few Chinese restaurants in Petaluma and Sonoma County. And, we were one of the few Chinese families in Petaluma and Sonoma County. And so I think for me, growing up in the Bay Area, as you know, Danny, having grown up in the South Bay, it is a really rich multicultural space to grow up in. And, I think for me, being in Petaluma and then Marin County, it did definitely feel like there was something that set me apart. And I think that I didn't necessarily have the language for it at the time. I think it, and there could have been a number of different factors. It was like me, whether it was the fact that I was biracial or Chinese American and my mom spoke with an accent, or I lived in Petaluma and all the other kids lived in Marin. And then later I would have a kind of a socioeconomic analysis to that and how that would influence my identity. But for me growing up, actually books were my friends. They were my best friends. Like I would never go anywhere without a book. My driving around with my mom, like being in her backseat as she accomplish the hundreds of tasks that one does as a restaurant owner and a small business owner and entrepreneur, I would always have a book with me. I would always be reading. And I think that like I loved novels. And I think now looking back, I realize, the worlds that you can sink within and lose yourself within as you can in novels was like a huge comfort for me. And I think really sparked creativity within me and also laid the foundation for me to be a working artist.
I have a lot of relatable experiences with you being a kid who grew up with their family business and also frequented the library due to those parents also working at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So libraries were also babysitters and a solace and entertainment factor.
Absolutely.
So tell me about that. Let's expand about growing up with a family business. What were those kind of experiences, watching your parents or especially your mom open up a restaurant, small business, as an entrepreneur, but also the experiences of you being, being a biracial kid and seeing kind of two sides of a culture, of the way of America kind of experiences you. Can you elaborate those experiences?
Totally. Yeah. So I think it's interesting because my mom, my mom really was like such an influential figure. Obviously, she's the reason why I'm born and exist. So she obviously was probably the most important imprint and influence on me. And, you're growing up at a time, especially in the suburbs, there's a lot of homogeneity at the time. Like there's a lot of like lack of discourse around biracial kids or multi-ethnic kids and what that means. And I didn't feel yet that there had been this flip where being of color or being not white was cool. Like it all felt a little dicey. I think that like, especially in the suburbs, like I'm reflecting on this a lot now, especially because I'm like here, but just throughout the duration, like how almost like competitive we felt as young kids of color, like in primarily white spaces, and how there was kind of this threat where you wouldn't really want to be that cool, like that, I didn't see the desire to have affinity groups with folks that were like biracial, multiracial, or of color until pretty late on, like probably in my high school years when I started realizing like, oh, like what does it mean to be othered? What is white privilege? What is racial equity? Like those questions. When you're a kid, you just want to be like everybody else. And I felt like at the time, and I will say this, like my parents worked extremely hard. They both came from very little. Like my parents were both like, my mom grew up in straight poverty, like abject poverty, and worked her way out. My dad came from a very working class military background and nothing was ever handed to him by any means. And so they worked very, very hard to create a life for me and for my siblings that did have opportunity, that did have privileges. And I am extremely thankful for that. I think it felt like it's that comparative feeling, right? When you're in the mix and you just feel othered, you feel different. And so negotiating that, knowing that I had such like pride for and love for my mom and for our culture and for, growing up in a Chinese restaurant, and my mother was always this incredible host, like, and that's what I think I carry with me. It's like this spirit of generosity where you create spaces and you cultivate spaces. And she really is an artist in the way that she does that. It's entrepreneurial, it's a small business, but her art is food. She's an incredible cook. And her art is convening and creating beautiful spaces and hospitality. And, when you are a survivor, like my mom is, a first generation immigrant, have to make it on your own, setting the foundation for yourself. You don't have, frankly, the luxury to say, oh, I'm going to be an artist. I'm going to be a painter. I'm going to be, a novelist, or, maybe things that she would have been able to do had she had that runway and had that support. But she really expressed herself creatively through her small business. And I think now upon reflection and looking back on how much that impacted me, and I think how much that gave me the trajectory to want to be in the arts and be in the creative field, because that was really the spirit of what she did. And she created a life for herself that was not handed to her and that she never would have envisioned. And if that's not art, like what is,
Mm-hmm. Do you think you, I'm sure you gravitated and pulled some lessons from her, watching your mom hustle, really, and did that kind of translate into what you do today in terms of your hustle? Just watching.
I definitely think so. Yeah. I mean, my mom, if there's one thing she taught me, like being at the restaurant, because I grew up in the restaurant, right? Like as soon as I was like 5, I was getting menus and cleaning them off after customers were done, and then seating kids, like how adorable to have a 5, 6-year-old kid like take you to your table and give your menus, right? Or, I was folding napkins. And I think if there's one thing my mom always taught me at the restaurant is like, she's like, there's always something to do. You're never just twiddling your thumbs or looking at, I mean, there was no looking at your phone at the time. Like, you're never just chilling at a restaurant. There's always, always, always something to do. And I think that notion of like, there's always something left undone. There's always something that you could be improving upon. There's always a task to be finished. It's like that ethic, and that's the ethic that made her so successful. And I think that's the ethic that was instilled in me. The idea of, you work to create an incredible experience for your customer. And I think that translates pretty seamlessly into like creating an experience for an audience when you're a performer, when you're a singer, you're any sort of artist. So I think there's so many lessons that I've learned for her. It's tenacity, it's resilience, it's belief in yourself. It's kind of like just making sure that you are absolutely your best. I think my mom, like I laugh, but my mom kind of feels like she invented like farm to table culture, because she was always like, she was always buying from like local vendors. Like she would go to the local duck farm in Petaluma and buy directly from them, or like go to the mushroom farm and buy directly from them. And then she'd be like, everybody thinks they're so cool for having direct relationships with the farmers. I was doing that in the early 90s. You remember, Hollis? And I'm like, yeah, I do remember you driving to the duck farm and that like the repulsive smell that would emanate from the slaughterhouse of the ducks. Like I just the visceral memories that I have of a kid of my mom's hustle. Like we grew up inside of a Costco. I always tell people that. Like I was raised inside of a Costco, and I know you know what I'm talking about. Like raised inside of wholesale retailers, and it is what it is. You have to make it work, and my mom never, I think that she was an incredible mom, an incredible lesson, or an incredible teacher. And again, she always provided. Like, I think her ideal wasn't like Hollis is going to be a singer songwriter and an independent artist. I don't think that's what she held in her heart of hearts when her eldest daughter was born. But she knew that I was a singer. She put me in choir. She knew I was like a natural performer. She put me in theater. Like, she was extremely responsive to my creative impulses, even if they weren't themselves like impulses that she was allowed to explore, given where she came from and the opportunities that she had.
So just to go on that, so when did the artistic bug hit you and bite you? What were your earliest experiences being an artist? Who probably kind of nurtured that desire, as well as who were your inspirations at the time, whether it's through music or people,
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as I mentioned, my mom, like really early on, like I was 5, 6, I think, put me into choir. I was in the Winifred Baker Children's Choir, which met at Dominican University in San Rafael. And I'll never forget walking into that room at the first time. I was super young, but I was so intimidated. It was in this big theater that kind of smelled a little musty, and there's all these kids and they were all singing. And I was like, this is a lot. This is overwhelming. But I was always in choir. I did theater, and then I did musical theater, which felt like a natural kind of combination of my desire to act and sing. And I did theater like all the way through high school because I just loved performing, and I loved, honestly, the camaraderie and the collaboration of choir and theater. And I really thought that that's where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. I really thought like, oh, it'd be so dope if I could be like a musical theater performer. And then I think, as a young person that was kind of gaining a more political analysis of the stories that are told and who's telling them. Like, this is way before Hamilton was like a thing, right? The only kind of multicultural representation that I saw in my high school years was like Rent, which was amazing. And for me was like, that was a huge musical for me because I was like, oh wow, look, it's like multicultural. It's telling like it's a cutting edge story. It's telling the story of like bohemian young people. It's edgy. It's progressive. So that was actually like a huge point of inspiration for me. But then I kind of looked at the landscape and it looked a little bleak for like an Asian presenting person with a lisp. I was like, yeah, not really sure about the opportunities that are going to be spilling away. It's already a hyper competitive space. And if I'm being really real, now that I know people that have been in musical theater, like I have a couple of friends, I'm not even trying to name drop, but I have a couple of friends that like were in Hamilton and like were in the original cast. And I'm like, there's no way I would have been able to cut that chop. Like that's just not, it's not my vibe. Like that wasn't going to happen with me anyway.
I can
So
imagine. I can imagine.
no, it's wild, man. That's a hella competitive, hella grueling, hella physical, all that. So anyway, but I think as I was in high school, again with that training of choir, and I think what choir really taught me was like working with others to have a unified voice, like a collective voice that's so powerful. You blend, you listen. There's a type of intuitive collaboration that you have to have in a choir that I think has served me very, very well as a collaborator and as a recording artist, frankly, because you have to learn harmonies, you have to know other people's parts, you have to know how things fit in. And now as a recording artist, I am my own choir. I layer, it's 5 vocal, we call them stacks, vocal stacks, but you layer 5 vocal tracks of yourself on top of each other. And it's like I'm being my own choir. So I'm really thankful for that training. But at a certain point in high school, I think I grew dissatisfied with being told what to sing, being told what to say, being told who I am on stage. That prescribed a character, or worse, like auditioning and not being right for the role and always being assigned to these kind of like very tangential parts because I didn't look the part or I wasn't what they had in mind with the part, right? So I started seeing this and I started having my own analysis of it. And that was when I was introduced to spoken word poetry, which is ultimately what brought you and I together and made us family. But the first couple of spoken word Asian American spoken word poets that really like awakened me to the idea, not only like, oh wow, you can tell your own story on stage, but also like I could tell my own story on stage. The first ever poet that I saw was Bao Fi from Minneapolis, and ended up being like a mentor and huge community leader. And also Adriel Lewis, who I still collaborate with to this day, but is, now he's a curator at the Smithsonian APA Center. But at the time, he was just a fierce 17-year-old poet spitting hot fire. And I was so amazed when I saw him perform the first time. I was at a place in San Francisco. We were at a final slam in San Francisco. There was like 2,000 people in the audience. I think we were at the Opera House, and there's teenagers spitting poetry. And there's just this young Chinese American kid spitting dope poetry. And I was totally amazed. I was like, I didn't know we could do that, and that really awakened me. And that set me on the course where I really, although like choir and theater were my training, were my foundation, I really credit like that moment and that awakening of seeing a poetry slam for the first time as that being my moment of inspiration, where I was like, oh, I can spend my life figuring out what stories I have within me, telling them from an authentic place where I don't have to don a character to be good enough to be on stage. Like I can actually shape this character and figure out where she fits in.
Yeah. And when I first met you and heard you, I was like, who is this kid? I did not know what to think, because I was still learning about our AAPI poetry national scene and trying to find community, but then finding that it was always here through people like yourself, through April, through people in Boston, New York, and it's like, all right, I'm not alone, and then it did embolden all our voices together. So let me just talk about the inspiration of what's happening now, because definitely I'm seeing more regional youth poet laureate programs popping up. Definitely more publishers are thinking of publishing youth poets and writers, as well as watching Amanda Gorman become the first national youth poet laureate of the nation. So can you talk about just like maybe youth speaks, and also just hip hop, because I know you're a hip hop head like me, and how that has influenced your artistic vision at some points in time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So as I mentioned, like poetry and spoken word poetry was really like the catalyst for everything I feel like I do now as a singer-songwriter. And and hip hop was a huge part of that. I think, to be really honest and to like acknowledge my own thing, like I am, a mixed Asian kid who grew up in the North Bay. Like while we were adjacent to Vallejo. It's not like I was up in the Vallejo rap scene by any means as a young person, but you know, I was in this very house where I find myself today, Larkspur adjacent, you know, downloading off of LimeWire some rap songs that took 4 hours to download one MP3 on the dial-up internet. I was there, here in the other room. And I think that what hip hop taught me, that I mean, hip hop, especially the era that you and I were coming up in, Danny, like that rap, that underground rap was like the richest storytelling I had ever heard in my ears. This is before podcasts or audiobooks. Like that was the richest, most nuanced, complex, impassioned storytelling that I had ever heard. And it gave me a portal and a window to a world where it was both a lived experience that I hadn't lived, that I hadn't understood, and yet was a human. And I hate to say, like, you know, universality is problematic, but I think that there was just something there that was so like human and pulsing and real and in touch with self in a way that I really only had seen that type of introspection and self-awareness in books. You know what I mean? So it's like hip hop to me brought that alive in a real way, shared that testimony of the lived experience that we know that hip hop was created upon. And I became really electrified by the idea of storytelling through rap, through rhyme. And that ultimately, like, I didn't start singing my own songs until I was like maybe 3 or 4 years into rapping, because I really thought, I was like, dang, like I love music so much and I've always been a musical performer, but you know, verse and rap and rhyme is like, that is powerful. And that's what really, like, you know, really, really sold me on this idea of art being able to shift perspective, and like, you know, art being at the center of social justice movements and community building. And so too, with Youth Speaks, as you had mentioned, like, yeah, I think for me, it's like those of us who had been in it, and I feel very grateful, like that I came up in like a youth slam scene, even though like slam itself is a little like kind of fundamentally problematic, because the idea of like scoring poetry and like putting this, you know, whack like capitalist lens on poetry, all that thing, that can be problematic. But what it did do was convene us in a way where, like, you know, in the same way that like youth athletes are like striving to be their best selves, like we were striving to be our best poetic selves, like in competition with each other, frankly. But it was also community building. And that was like a moment for me when I went to my first national youth poetry slam, and it's all these poets from across the country, across the world, coming through, telling their story, being incredible performers, captivating audiences, holding their ground, holding the floor. That was just such a pure and raw expression of power and youth potential that, you know, I knew like the moment, the mainstream moment would catch up for youth poetry, because it's so undeniable. And like, even with all due respect, like Amanda Gorman is awesome. And like, when you go to a youth slam, like where you're seeing these young high schoolers like really rip and really say some raw ish, like there is nothing like that. Like there's no polish on it. It's so raw. It's so real. It's so electrifying. And I see hundreds of adults who come in kind of unaware, and they think they're doing something charitable by being in the presence of these young people. They get their whole lives rocked, and they walk out of there being completely transformed humans, because they're just like, what just happened? Somebody just put an electric volt into my chest and turned it on. Like, it's so powerful. And it isn't the type of like pomp and circumstance of an inauguration. This is like on some like real grab you like and pull your heart out your chest type ish. So anyway, I feel like that's always been my baseline. And so sometimes they're like, oh, you're so passionate about these things, or how they did. It's like, if you were there, you would know why I feel like a spark plug when it comes to this work, because that's what fueled me. And that is the community that I found myself in so gratefully, because I felt like this wayward, suburban, weirdo, different, othered in some ways, othered in not ways kid. And I was able to find a community where I was like, oh, I don't have to front like I'm anybody else other than who I am, and I could be appreciated for my story and my gifts. And I recognize my responsibility to like bear witness to other people's stories, and be present and be as contributive as I can be towards making sure that we can all get free through our words.
I really tell people out there, if you haven't been to a poetry slam, and I pray that we get to the point where we're back into
Yeah.
venues, but and especially a youth poetry slam, it's a force of nature. It really transforms you to the belief
Yes.
that the next generation is gonna, knock your socks, and you have trust in them to lead the way. Definitely.
Right.
Hollis, so let's talk, now that we're talking about your influences, also getting into, working on your music career. I know
Yeah.
you've gone, as you continued on your music career, you got to do a lot of speaking engagements, and be a part of a lot of initiatives. How important is the intersection of arts with social justice within our current climate, but all for always? Why is it important
Hmm.
to add the arts to, what we do in politics or even in the community?
Totally. I mean, there's so many answers to that question.
Yeah.
For me, that's really my life's work, is like seeing. I think I wouldn't be an artist if I didn't see its inherent ability to impact and change our society for the better. I think for me, I am a purpose driven person. I want to see things transform. I want to shake up what is and get us closer to what could be. And, now, like, even more than ever, you're in my community, Danny, we are being like, we are rocked and reeled and grieving from like our desperate need to create a world where we're all protected, right? So I wouldn't be an artist if I didn't really truly believe, because of that foundation from Youth Speaks, because of that foundation and seeing poetry be not even a tool, but just like it being the device and that brought community together and envisioned a new world. It's like we need imagination and creativity to get us to the place that we need to go. And I've been reflecting a lot about how sometimes we can feel really helpless in the moment and be like, how are we ever going to get out of this moment in time? It all feels so crushing. It all feels so hopeless. And then I think about the immense amount of creativity that it took for generations past of people, our ancestors, or the generations in the United States, the Black community. Like,
Mhm.
it took a tremendous courage and creativity to see what could be.
Mhm.
And we need arts to be able to point the path forward to what could be, let alone the fact that working artists and creatives are oftentimes the most impacted by our social inequity. We are, by and large, creatives and artists are always going to be at the heart and be the most impacted when it comes to socioeconomic injustice, when it comes to racial injustice, when it comes to gender injustice. And so by centering creative voices and folks that are already honing their voices to speak, we are actually centering the most impacted folks quite often. And also by through creativity, allowing an avenue that isn't actually just privileging like the most educated or the people who know how to use English the best. You know what I mean? Like, really, if we can really start to value creative forms of expression as much as we do academic forms of expression, that in and of itself will create a more equitable exchange, a more equitable dialogue. Um, so for me, like, I am motivated to be an artist because of community building. Like, that's what drives me. If there wasn't there, like, I'm actually very uncomfortable with like the self-promotional, like, kind of more ego-driven aspects of being an artist. It makes me kind of like that. And sometimes I feel like it kind of like inhibits my ability to really go up, but at the end of the day, it's like I want to be as true to myself as I can, and I've had the privilege of being. And I feel like through that, I have the responsibility to raise my profile, raise my platform so that I can effectively advocate for issues in community, effectively platform people who aren't often heard, and just really see that exchange and understand that, like, as much as we can be powerful in reacting to tragedy and reacting to that which holds us back, we have to be equally motivated by envisioning what we need, the life and the world that we deserve, and the life and the world where we all are empowered and liberated. And so I really think that creativity and arts has a central place in that, and thus creatives and artists should be centered in social movement, in policy work. I'm very passionate
Mhm.
about centering artists in policy, and not just policy that impacts arts and culture, but like environmental policy, housing policy. Center artists, and you are going to get a better, more creative, more inspired vision and path forward.
I'm grateful that just let us know about that, because it's how I feel about the arts working in the library world. Because I feel like, yes, we in the library world, we do provide the literature, we provide self-education, but we provide inspiration, opportunity to
Yes.
discover, and
Yes.
sometimes in our world it's not celebrated enough, and that's why I feel like it's weird where we can put a dollar amount on how do we sell it, yet we won't invest in it with that same kind of
Yeah.
dollar amount,
Totally. No, and libraries are revolutionary. I know you know this because you're a librarian and you're here and you are, I mean, they are, because they create equalized spaces where people have access to resources that they wouldn't otherwise have, create places where people can learn and that are centered around learning and self and development of self and of the mind. And they are, I mean, yeah, and I'm most of my experience now as an adult comes from the Seattle Public Library system because I spent so much time up there and I have friends that work in programming there. But that's where like the most like brilliant ideas for what the future holds are incubated are in libraries, because it is the space of equalization, unlike academia where you have to pay a fee and you have to have resources and oftentimes like, coming from different types of privileges in order to access that space. Libraries are for the people and they're for the people experiencing homelessness. They're for people who don't have a computer at their crib. Like they're for the people who have not so that they can have, and we should be supporting that as taxpayers.
Sorry, I'm gonna take that as a sound bite. Just remember that, guys. Hollis says here, support your libraries.
Support your local library.
Support your local library. It's free. So I want to pull away, the shiny veneer of, the industry that you work in, which is the music industry. Really, how has it been as an Asian American woman, independent, creator, in the music industry? And what are some of the obstacles and issues that you have faced and you see others facing, past and present, that impede the progress of other BIPOC creative artists, and whether in music, film, fashion, whatever,
Totally. Yeah. So I've been an independent artist. So I first started recording and releasing my music like a cool like 12 years ago, right? So I was like 20, 21. I was recording like in my friends' living rooms or basements, and I didn't even know what mastering a song was. I barely knew what mixing a song was. We're releasing our music on Bandcamp back in the day. Shout out Bandcamp, and like burning CDs on my computer and writing on Sharpie the name of the album and putting them into these plastic jewel cases and selling them. I've been on that DIY life. And what I've found now as an independent artist, still releasing music now in 2021, there is so many costs associated to it doing it well. I would never say that the market is oversaturated because that would imply that it's too full. And I don't think that there's such thing as like there being not enough room for all the creative impulses, but it's a hyper-saturated landscape. And money is really the deciding factor in who's heard and who isn't, resources and money and, relationships in that sense. It is really, really difficult for independent artists to find a way to make it sustainable. And if I'm being really transparent, while I'm very grateful for the income that comes in as an independent artist, like I have a whole other side hustle, like, and it's not even really a side hustle. I have a whole other job. I'm a freelancer and it is creative. I'm very grateful. Like I'm a creative facilitator. And I come in and do strategic facilitation for organizations and for government entities. And I also do, executive production of content, oftentimes for nonprofits. But yeah, I think, and I'm thankful for those things. They allow me to tell stories or they allow me to convene and kind of do the same things that I like to do in my art. But that's essential income for me because being an independent artist is expensive. It's very expensive. It's expensive to be alive in 2021, and it's expensive to release music and be a creative in 2021. So I think a lot of the conversations I've been having with my peers are that oftentimes these industries that we are in are inherently exploitative, or they've been built to be exploitative just due to the systems that are. I think one thing that I've been really passionate about learning about recently is copyright and IP ownership, and the ways that historically IP ownership and copyright has really been that information has been withheld like intentionally from communities of color. I work with an organization called the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice. And within that, there's a program called Take Creative Control, which is a lot more accessible than the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice. But Take Creative Control is actually about talking to creators of color about issues of IP and copyright. Inspired, it was actually founded within the law school of Howard University, and it was really recognizing that particularly Black Americans have been generationally and historically dispossessed of their copyright, and we see it today. We're seeing it today in the last 24 hours on Jimmy Fallon, Addison Rae's dance and the TikTok videos, the TikTok dances that are completely like their origin of the songs and the original choreographers is entirely removed, and it's just this white TikTok creator who's really just regurgitating the creative work of Black people and Black creators on TikTok. So we see it in real time, and we see it all the time. We see the ways in which oftentimes creators of color are removed from their creative works, and that creative work goes on to monetize for somebody that is not them, and becomes mainstream, and those creators are left in the dust. So it's a really rich discourse, and I think that feel really grateful that I'm plugged in, because there's a lot of education there, and I'm really passionate about empowered creativity and what that means. And I think that it's been a long road for me, even as somebody who's identified as an artist since I was 19, to really feel like I'm in a space where I understand what's said in a contract when it comes across my desk, and decoding all of the obscure and opaque ways that the industry functions. Ultimately creators who, especially Black and brown creators, none of these industries would move without what we create. And yet, how are we the least paid and the least owning of all of the various entities that come within our various industries? So it's still a journey for me. It's still a process, but it's a conversation and a dialogue and a point of, again, community organizing that I'm really, really interested in, because I think it's so important for creators to feel capable and feel like success is possible. And that has a lot to do with self-education, so that we can effectively advocate for ourselves in these industries.
I'm grateful that you and your cohort are definitely moving on to helping others be, knowledgeable about this, because, you talked about TikTok, technology has spread, meme culture or hyper, culture far off. I know NFTs have been the talk of the town these days. It's an interesting time, from Fortnite dances, which are not really their dances. It's dances from people of color, Black culture that's been reappropriated and sold, monetized over a CGI overlay, which is I still find problematic. But I'm glad we're having these discussions, and we should always have the discussions, regardless of what people think is, it's too much. I'm like, no, because we have gone too far without talking about it. So let's talk about it. So
that part.
I'm happy and I'm stoked. I'm kind of pumped right now. So
it's
dope. Hey. I know, like right now we're just talking and joshing, but how has the pandemic kind of impacted you? Because I want to know, how has it personally impacted you as a creative, but as a person as well, during this whole year,
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's been hard for everybody, right? Like, so hard. I'm so thankful now that my parents are vaccinated, because even to be with them inside without a mask on is such a gift, and something that I really can't ever take for granted again. Like, I'm just so grateful that they made it out alive, frankly, because I think that anxiety of our loved ones dying of COVID was real, and a lot of people's loved ones did die, and it's so tragic and so enraging, frankly. That's a whole other road that I could go down, but for purposes of clarity, I will. I think for me as a performer and as an artist, I had a really profound realization in the wake of the lockdown, that I really, as I had mentioned, the thing that motivates me the most as an artist is community. It's the community that allowed me to meet you, Danny, and allowed us to meet so many of our friends that I feel give my life meaning, give my life depth and richness, and give me purpose. And when everything shut down and, my artistry and myself as a performer didn't have a space anymore, like I was into the digital convenings and virtual events if they felt contributive to community. But as a performer, the last place I want to be performing is on a Zoom to a silent audience. Like that to me is worse than not performing at all. And so I didn't really do it. I think it's a lot of folks, and that's just me, right? A lot of people found their outlets on Twitch or doing Facebook Lives. And I love seeing, I love tuning into those. I love seeing DJs perform or the ways that people got super creative digitally. For me as a performer, I wasn't about it. I just couldn't, and it couldn't kick the inspiration in for me. So it was depressing and it was sad. And, I was making a decent amount of money as a performer and that all went away really quickly. So I had to dive headfirst into other work. And I kind of walked away from my artistry. But thankfully, I found inspiration again. I found safe ways of collaborating with people. I got a lot more capable and autonomous with my own creative process, which was new for me. I better learned how to record myself. I learned how to do virtual Zoom sessions with creators and actually learned how to write songs. So learned how to write songs on my own in a way that I'd usually gone to a recording studio or what have you. So that's been big for me. And so the last 4 months I've really been taking this as a challenge, almost like a writing prompt. Okay, it's a pandemic, now what? And so I have become more inspired in a way that I was really depressed before, really, really worn out. And for me, again, I'm a super social person. I really get my life from other people. So not being able to be around people safely was really, really hard. I know you're the same. So it's just tough. It's tough to not be able to be around your people. And this is wonderful, but it's not the same as being with each other in real life,
And it's fine because I know it will change because I
Yes.
definitely, my next question is are you looking forward to performing again and touring?
Hell yeah, you know it. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And I'm a little nervous too because I'm a little rusty and I'm a little worried that everybody and their mom's gonna try to perform. So I'm gonna be I'm gonna be 100 millionth in line. But I'm so excited to be around it. I'm just excited to be as a fan more than anything. Performing's gonna be amazing when I'm ready and I have this whole slate of new songs that I have to figure out what the band is and what my experience is performing. But I just want to go to a show and just weep while watching live performers perform again safely.
Mhm.
I want that more than anything, and that's what I'm most excited about.
I think so. I miss going to shows. I'm ready to spend my money just to
Yes, take
sit
my
nosebleed
money.
and just take my money.
Oh my
$50 shirt,
gosh.
sure,
Right.
whatever.
Yeah,
Here.
right. You only have XL. That's fine. It's
I
fine. I'll figure it out.
I'll make into a dress, whatever.
Yeah.
Dish rag. I don't
A
care.
sarong. Yes, exactly.
um, maybe we're wrapping it up, but what are some
Hmm.
tips that you can let our patrons know, whether they don't know too much about the industry, but if they are planning on trying to release music or get into what you do, what are some tips they should kind of understand from the get-go to maybe protect themselves or prepare themselves
Mm.
as a creative songwriter, rapper, what have you?
Totally. I think something that I really wish that I had focused more on when I was a young person, because again, as we talked about, I grew up learning how to hustle, learning how to work it, learning to, and I think I overemphasized the relationships and the connections and the networking side of it. And I wish that I had spent more time honing the craft side of it.
Mm.
And I really should have taken a cue from the novelists that I love when I was reading as a young kid into today. It's it's not about the cosign. When you write a book, it's not about who is going to be on the quote on the cover. It's about what's in between the covers. And it's I think oftentimes young people, we see the relationships that people have and we over privilege positionality.
Mm.
And what we should really be doing is developing our craft and developing our creative autonomy, something that I've had to really go back to the drawing board for and be a beginner in. For me, as a recording myself, becoming my own vocal producer, becoming my own vocal engineer. I'm going to be releasing music this year where I'm the vocal engineer for the first time ever, and I wish that I had learned how to do that 10 years ago. So you have to have humility to do that. You have to, and I think that somewhere, I think subconsciously in my mind, I thought, oh, if I'm a real recording artist, other people will record me. And now I'm at this place where it's no, if you're a real recording artist, that means you know how to do it. Even if you hire other people to do it, that's what it means to be real. I think I've been reading The Artist Way by Julia Cameron, and doing her process. And I think it's been really helpful for me to realize that you know, we look, especially as musicians, we think about, oh, I want to get premiered on the Fader. Oh, I want my music video to hit 100,000 plays or whatever. If those kind of like analytics, or like I want 1 million plays on Spotify, like if those numbers, those like things are what motivates your artistry, you're never really going to be creating something that's true to you, and nor will it be that interesting. Like that's just not the way to success. Like I think to have a goal as a creative really means to have the goal of tapping into the true you. And like in a world where we're so driven by likes and follower counts, and like it's so easy to get lost in the numbers that that theoretically signify success, but really themselves are meaningless if the work isn't there. So it's like hone your craft, get great at your craft, worry less about meeting the right person or getting the right permission from somebody or getting the right deal. It's like you have to grow your own thing in your own right. And owning your audience is the most valuable thing you can do. It's like even if you have 100,000 followers on Instagram, if it comes time for you to sell a show, like it would be way better for you to have 1,000 people on an email list than have 10,000 followers on Instagram, because at the end of the day, it's like you want to be able to connect with people directly, and these platforms are interfacing and they're gatekeeping you from the people that you want to support you. So just never invest too much into one specific type of social media platform, and really try to cultivate direct relationships with your audience.
Those are diamond gems right there, because a lot of people don't hear this. And I've mentioned before, don't trust on putting your whole life or business on a social media platform, because
No,
it could
not
go
at
away.
all.
It could go away anytime.
It could go away in a moment in time. R.I.P. Vine.
So any shout outs, projects? I know you mentioned something on Friday, and last words that you want to share with our audience out here in Marin.
In Marin County, well, I want to shout out you, Danny, because you are such a light and a gift to us in the world, and now to Marin County libraries. It really is this full circle moment where I feel like I was raised in Lawrenceburg Library. Shout out the librarian Lynn. She was British and she always held the good books for me. I was like, thanks, Lynn. She was always like, I knew you were coming. And I'm like, you knew I was coming because my mom drops me off here every Tuesday through Thursday for like 3 hours. And I have to be like, oh yeah, my mom, she's running an errand. When really I was like, I'm about to be here till 7. So thank you. I want to shout out our APIA Summit family and just all of the amazing Asian American creators, especially over this last like few weeks, how we, you know, are holding and grieving and processing a lot. That what has happened to us in this moment and also happened to us generationally and through centuries of violence. But I think that ultimately we know that we are as strong as each other. And I'm just like appreciative for spaces, and just want to give a big shout out to like, especially these Bay Area Asian American organizers are really like showing up. Like I'm really, really impressed by the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, APEN, who's been doing organizing and creating vigils and spaces for us to like really bring our whole selves. And it's been amazing. To that end, I want to shout out Michelle Mush Lee, a huge mentor of mine from You Speaks, but she created a really, really amazing poem that she read at one of those vigils. And so definitely check her out. I think it's Whole Story Project on Instagram, or Michelle Mush Lee, but she is the best. Mush, sorry. And yeah, I think any other shout outs? Yeah, check out my single, Six Sad World, coming out this Friday. I'm going to have a lot of music coming out this year. So yeah.
Yes, if you haven't heard of Hollis' music, or you haven't checked it out, please hit her Bandcamp. Check out her videos on YouTube. Check out the amazing TED Talk she did in Seattle. I love that one. You are an artist who will go far because you know that you're about longevity for self. You understand yourself and you project that. So you don't follow the confines of that industry. You follow your own heart and your own beat of your drum. So I know you're gonna keep going till I'm around. So, and I'm hoping to be around for a long time.
You will be.
Thank you so much, Hollis. This is great. This is amazing.
Thank you. I so appreciate you so much, and thank y'all who tuned in.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining me and Hollis and the Marin County Free Library for this amazing interview. It will be up soon, but share this once you see the link in YouTube. Without further ado, just be safe. We hope to see you soon in our libraries. Go out, read some books. We'll see you later.
Read some books.
Peace.
Bye.